truly feel like nothing can change or will change. And what's happening is a change. We are at a turning point, and we are at a crossroads. And I believe that if we keep at it, and if we keep working, and if we stay disciplined, and if we are focused on our future, on dismantling systems of white supremacy, belief systems of white supremacy, which is really important for us to really discuss about, because so often, I think even leading up to this moment, people think this is about people who are racist, and that's not how racism works. It's about beliefs, actions, attitudes that are racist, and systems that have upheld white supremacy. It's about our history. It's about our history. It's about our present moment. And I believe that, and so now is not the moment to give up. More than ever, now is not the moment to give up. The windows are just opening. And sorry, y'all. I know you guys are saying that my connection is bad, so I'm trying to. I hope this works a little bit better. Let me know if this works out a little better. I'm going to try to connect with you all. Let me know if this connection is improved a bit. But yeah, so now is just not the moment to give up, because these windows are opening right now. Despair is not an option, because what these systems would have us to believe, systems want us to believe, is that it's too late and that we are too far gone, and that it is not worth. And if anything, right now what this moment shows us is that it is worth standing up. It is worth identifying injustice. It is worth standing up to all these things. And so, see you guys seeing that the connection's better. So it is worth it. So again, I wanted to just reconnect and see if we can answer some of your questions, and see what's going down. So thank you so much. This morning we spent feeding folks. We were delivering meals throughout the community because, as many of you know, these are injustices that are layered one on top of another. And this is about, right now, this is about our crisis of police brutality, but this is about systemic racism in so many different forms. Racism in housing discrimination, racism in our healthcare inequities, racism in living wages, evictions, so on. So I'm going to hop on. I'm going to start answering some of your questions that you all have. But I'm seeing some people saying, I'm sad. This is a moment to be sad. This is space for everyone to feel so many different reactions, grief, all of it. But again, I think it's so important to communicate that we have windows that are just starting to open right now. And there are possibilities that are opening right now for real systemic policy change. And that's something that we can truly push for. Someone says, one police bad decision does not represent the other 99.9% of good. I think what's really important is that whether it's racism, whether we're talking about police brutality, people try to individualize these issues, that this is about good people and bad people. And that's a very convenient frame. It's very simplistic, and it's very easy to understand. But when we talk about police brutality, this is not an issue of good apples and bad apples. This is an issue of corrupt systems that shield from accountability. And When you have a system that does not allow a person who murdered a human being from facing consequences and that denies that community justice, it is a corrupt system. You can have all good people in a corrupt system, but corrupt systems can produce corrupt outcomes. The fact that this officer was not immediately arrested was an injustice. And that's not just because the officer was a bad person. This is because of a system of politicians that are afraid to stand up for Black lives. This is about a system of power. This is about an attorney's office that was saying today that this is the 4 days or so. This is the fastest they've ever arrested a police officer, when the Minnesota PD has a very disturbing history of shootings. This is where Philando Castile was killed, where this one officer alone had 18 documented complaints, many of them violent, and that this now was the fastest that anyone has ever been arrested, or rather any officer has ever been arrested. What that tells us is that they are not holding those quote unquote bad apples accountable. And what that does is that it indicts an entire system. And I very much sympathize with all of this, because I have had police officers in my family. This is not, and I've also had people who've been incarcerated in my family. This is not about good people and bad people. This is about systems that allow individuals who have killed other individuals to walk free. And when you do that, you violate the sense and you disintegrate rule of law in the United States of America, because what you do is that you're advancing this idea that the law applies to some people and not others. And whether it's a police officer, whether it's an elected official like me, whether it's the President of the United States, once you start holding people to different standards of the law, you disintegrate rule of law, which is one of the foundational aspects of peace and an orderly society. And so when we are seeing this disorder right now, we are seeing a consequence of systemic inequality. We are seeing the consequences of 40 million people unemployed. We are seeing the consequences of systemic housing discrimination, wealth discrimination. We are seeing the consequences of different rules of law for different classes and races of people. And that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And so what we need to do, what our job right now to do, is to stay hyper-focused and disciplined when it comes to the pursuit of justice. And what that means is demanding justice for George Floyd. What it also means is no longer tolerating politicians that will take money away from schools in order to add money to militarized police. Right now in New York City, we have a police budget of $6 billion for the New York City Police Department, yet our public schools in our poorest and blackest and brownest school districts are constantly underfunded, that kids do not have opportunity, educational opportunity, employment opportunity, housing opportunity. And when you defund opportunity and you take money away from schools and put it into investing in guns and into investing in militarized forces, what you are doing is that you are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of social destabilization and violence. And it doesn't have to be that way. And the hope of this situation is that we can change it. We can change it. We can defund the priorities that we have set. One thing that we can do in New York City is look at New York City's funding priorities. And we can also make sure that there's so many things that you can do right now. There's action you could take at the ballot box. There's action you can take with mutual aid. There's action you can take if you've got $1 in your pocket, you can send it to a bail fund. You can send it to a mutual aid organization that's giving meals. You can be out there in the streets delivering meals. And if you need help figuring out who to connect with, we're happy to connect you. Right now, what we're doing out here in our community, I can just speak, I'll just start off speaking right now. What we're doing in our community is that we're organizing people here in the Bronx and Queens to deliver meals out to our elders and to our seniors so that people aren't hungry right now, because so many people are unemployed and aren't getting stimulus payments. We have also been fundraising out for on the ground grassroots organizations in Minnesota. So we've been fundraising for, I believe, Reclaim the Black in Minneapolis, and Black Visions Minnesota, Black Visions Minneapolis, who have been doing active decarceral work and fighting for racial justice. And so the first thing you can do is connect with grassroots organizations and support them with your time, support them with your follow on social media, support them with your amplification. You don't need money, but you can give your time, you can give your skill, you can give your love, you can give your attention. And even if your support right now, even if where you're at right now is that you don't feel like you know enough, what you can do right now is follow some of these organizations and start to educate yourself on and be curious about everything that's going on right now. Learn about what white supremacy actually is, because it's not a person in a hood. It's a belief system that permeates through so much of the subconscious of our society, because this is a country that was founded on slavery and evolved into Jim Crow and evolved into redlining and evolved into mass incarceration. One thing that you can also do right now is show up for the Black people in your life, which is really important. Your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends, and don't ask them what they need. Show up for them and give them anything that you have. That unconditionality is really important, because we're going through a collective trauma. We're going through a collective trauma of COVID, a collective trauma of unemployment, a collective trauma of police brutality, a collective trauma of uncertainty about our future, a collective trauma of anxiety about where our future is going. And we can heal ourselves from that, but it requires community, and we need to come together and we need to educate ourselves. And if you are white, even if you're Latino, even if you're a person of color, we still have and benefit from colorism in our community, because racism is one thing, but also there's colorism in our communities as well. And that's something that you can also educate yourself. Shed yourself of this ignorance of, if you're Latino, you can't be racist. If you're XYZ, you can't be racist. These are about, again, just like we said, this is not a good apples and bad apples, or racists or not racists. This is about systems and beliefs that we've had, that are in our culture, that are around us, that we can grow our consciousness around. And just because you identify something that you have done, or a problematic thing that you have done in the past, it does not mean you're an irredeemable human being. It doesn't even mean that you're a bad human. It means that we are in a society that does not care for all people in the same way, and teaches people to not care for others in the same way. Sorry guys, it says the connection is bad. It's not telling me them out. I'm very sorry. But that being said, I want to go with what you got. Someone says, how can we make sure the history of race in this country schools? One thing is that if you're an educator, don't whitewash MLK's history. Don't buy into this textbook, white gaze a historical view of Martin Luther King, because he did not just show up on Washington and said, I have a dream. The man was a radical. And so one thing you can do is that, during not just Black History Month, but all about MLK, and when we're teaching about other Black figures, teach the full history, because people don't know that he denounced U.S. imperialism, he criticized poverty, and frankly started in so much of his advocacy when his life was taken. And so one thing that we could do is, even in the things that you are already teaching, if you are an educator, the things you are already teaching in school, make sure that you are teaching it in a way that is true to life and true to history. And really look at the lenses with which especially our history classes, our literature classes, our art classes are there. So that's one thing to do. Just taking a look at some other things. Someone says, how can I be a better ally during the pandemic? I'd like to be protesting in New York City, but it feels too risky. I saw the end of that question before. So one thing, about activism and protesting in general is, first of all, let's not forget that this is happening in the context of an unprecedented global pandemic. If you are immunocompromised, if you feel like it is if you feel for you right now that you cannot be, whether you have a disability, whether you're immunocompromised, if you have a mental health issue that you're concerned about being triggered out there, there are multiple ways to contribute, and there's multiple ways to give. So, one thing that I would say is to look out for your health. And if you are going out, still look out for your health. Make sure that you're wearing masks. Try to be socially distanced. Please, bring hand sanitizer with you. It's really important because this is happening in the middle of a pandemic. And so one of the things that you can do is read, engage in anti-racist literature and work. You can Google it. You can take a look at it. You can donate to anti-racist organizations, criminal justice, or rather criminal reform organizations, racial justice organizations, housing. So that's one thing that you can do, but there's a lot of resources. Let's see. Someone said, can we agree that riots are not the answer? I think this is an important thing for us to talk about, because, what's happening right now is not an outcome that any person wants. No one wants us to be at this type of perilous point. No one wants to feel this way. No one wants to feel this endangered. No one wants to feel this on the cusp. But it's important to also understand this context that we're operating in. When people talk about riots, they try to blame this on James Baldwin has an excellent has an excellent thought that he had said during one of these interviews when someone had asked him, what about people that take TVs? And what he said is, he talks about the history of the Black community and essentially says, how can you accuse people that have been stolen, that have been robbed of everything, of looting? And so I completely understand, because we don't want to be at this point, but how did we get to this point is the question that we need to ask. And how do we dismantle the conditions that have created this point is the much more sustainable path to go down, because the conditions that led us to this point are what created the riots, and or not even riots. The conditions that led us into this point are what created this moment and this instability. So housing discrimination, record income inequality, record unemployment, what we are seeing with the Minnesota Police Department, clearly this officer had 18 complaints, many of them violent, and he was still on the job in communities. Every single time that a person dismissed one of these violent incidents and sent him back out, they were putting the community at risk. Every single time. And a person does not get 18 complaints on them dismissed by accident. That does not happen by accident. That is systemic. That is a systemic problem. It points to broken systems. So we want to prevent this from happening. We need to fix broken systems. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. So these are an incredibly important, all of these are incredibly important things for us to take a look at. I'm continuing on here, taking a look at some of your questions. Let's see. Sorry, y'all, I'm just taking a look at some of your questions. There's so many here. Let's see. What do you think about WHO, U.S. broken relations, which also happened today? Listen, this president is withdrawing us from a global community. And this is something that authoritarians do. And that is what Donald Trump is. He is an authoritarian. He is withdrawing from a global community. And this is just an ultimate, cut off your nose to spite your face kind of moment. The WHO focuses on vaccines, and they focus on making sure that we are having global communication and essentially that we're working together globally from a public health perspective, whether it's vaccines, whether it's coordinated response, whether it's viral tracking or other disease tracking. And now is not the moment for us to be withdrawing from global community. It's, in fact, now is a moment where we should be looking at global community now more than ever. And even when it comes to systems and organizations that may not be perfect and that need to be fixed or may have made mistakes, that is the time to lean in. And that is the time to ask questions, but that is not the time to withdraw. And so, of course, it is an utter mistake. I'll do one more question and then I'll head out. Let's see. Sorry, y'all. I'm just coming in here, just taking a look at all of your questions. How should the Latinx community focus on ending our anti-Black contributions? This is such an important question. And so I think it's an important question and it's an important conversation that we need to have as Latinos, Latinas, and the Latinx community. Because our community is, and who we are is so so diverse in its identity, right? Because to be Latino, or for example, I'll take my life. I'll take my example. As a Boricua, as a Puerto Riqueña, my heritage and my identity, in the United States, I am Latina, and that's just like what you are, right? But you know that you go back home, or you go back to La Isla, or you go back in your identidad as a Latina, or just as a human being in Puerto Rico, you are, what I am, like, even in terms of my DNA or what goes into me, is that, I am indigenous. My heritage, my roots, my ethnic makeup, or I suppose my racial makeup, because as we're taking the census, Latinos are not a race, right? We're an ethnicity. And so every time you take a census, or every time you have to check a box, Latino is not under the racial section. And so oftentimes they make you choose black, white, indigenous, Asian, etc. And the answer is that for many of us, we are all or most of the above. My heritage is Native, my heritage is Black, and my heritage is Spanish, European. And what colonization has done to Latinos has essentially been an indoctrination that proximity to whiteness is a form of safety or a form of elevated status. And so you could be super brown and check off the white box, because a lot of folks are taught that in America, anything not the white box takes away certain privileges and protections. And we hear it all the time. Pelo bueno, pelo malo. That's about proximity to whiteness. Pelo bueno is pelo, hair that is more white looking or Eurocentric. Pelo malo has historically been a term that is hair that's more Afrocentric. And it's wrong. And in my family, if you actually saw my family makeup or a photo of my family is like the whole spectrum. I have Afro-Latino family. And I'll never forget the moment when my goddaughter at 2 years old, 3 years old, asked me to have her curly hair straightened at a salon. And I asked her, why on earth do you want your beautiful hair changed? And she had already internalized at 2-3 years old that it was pelo malo, that it was less than, that it was undesirable. And that's wrong. And so there's a lot of people in our family that we have to have dinner table conversations in Latinidad as well. About when babies are born, like cómo se salió, like all of this stuff is colonized language. And colorism is a very real thing. And it also manifests in kind of self-hatred as well. I remember, so Spanish was my first language spoken at home, and I learned English second. And I remember, I moved to a white school district, and these scripts that you learn almost subconsciously happen very quickly. And I remember as a kid, I slowly started to grow embarrassed of speaking Spanish in public, especially in white areas, like in a classroom, if I had to call my mom or something like that, or had to talk to my family on a payphone. And I grew up around family that did not speak English. And so I slowly, as a child, didn't even realize, but I slowly started speaking Spanish on the phone. All of this is very deeply learned psychologically and culturally kind of absorbed behavior. And it's not your fault. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because this is the water that we're swimming in. And this is part of the deep transformation that we need to make as a country and as a society. And it requires a lot of dedication in learning about our history and learning about our context. But this is work that everybody has to do, not just white people. Not just white people. This is work that everyone has to do. And so it's also an important question, because you can experience racism and also, have been subjected to it, and in these mechanisms of survival, of navigating around it, you learn that proximity to kind of this idea of whiteness it becomes a survival mechanism. And the ability to choose that is a privilege, even if it comes from a place of trauma. So all of this stuff is very, it's a lot of stuff to untangle, but it is work that we all have to do. And so anyways, I'm just going to pop off. I just wanted to kind of come in here and give some thoughts to you all and let you know that we are going to get through this. We're going to get through this together, and we are going to get through this together and have a new day. And that new day will be better. It will be more just, and it will require a lot of it's going to require a lot of endurance from us, but that's because this is not about us. This is about our children, this is about our grandchildren, and this is about the world that we're going to leave. And I, for one, will not leave. I refuse to leave a worse world for those to come. So thank you all so much. Stay safe.